Okay, I've started it, Barry, so I'll mute my mic now.
Okay, I'll see if I can get it to come up. There we go. Okay, hopefully whoever's come on, I think we just have one on, Melanie. Someone can see that, and as more people join, they'll be able to see that there's our start page there. I'm just going to do a quick practice now to make sure it moves on. Yes, it does. Right. So I'll just keep talking generally. I'll talk about the weather. That's an interesting thing to do for about 2 or 3 minutes to give everyone a chance to get logged on. Those who are going to be joining us. Welcome to everyone who's just joining us this morning. Yeah, I'll talk about it. Isn't it brilliant, this weather? I love it. I know not everyone does, and I know there are people out there who have health issues and don't like hot weather, but I'm sorry, I absolutely love it. I should live in a country like this where it's like this every day. It's fantastic. I don't know how you're all finding working, those who are working from home. I know that can be well, not difficult, but it can be awkward at times. I've got a fairly small little study here, but it gets very hot in the afternoon when the sun goes round and I get the sun coming in. It gets pretty uncomfortable in here, so I tend to decamp out to the living room, take over the main table downstairs, at least get a bit more of a breeze coming through. I think we're all finding it pretty warm. The garden's enjoying it though. Just looking out my window, my garden looks pretty good. Not that I take any credit for it. My wife does all the gardening in our house, so I cut the grass when I'm told to. I think that's a familiar story from many blokes out there, perhaps. So I make it another minute or so, yeah. What was I going to say? Okay, yeah, just to reiterate how we're going to run these briefings again. So we've got 12 in all. This is the second this month to get us up to speed, because we obviously didn't do one in April. So there'll be 12 briefings in the year, all the way through to March. And the requirement is that we've done an assessment really on this, that you should attend 6 of them to have it classed as your mandatory training compliance. I'd like you to attend as many as you can, because I hope that actually they're informative. My actual starting point on this isn't to tick the box on the toolkit to say we've got everybody has completed their mandatory training. My starting point is to make sure people know a little bit more about information governance. So that's the specific aim. The sort of secondary aim is that we do, as an organization, have to get everybody to reach that level of compliance. So the way to do it is, as I say, to make sure everyone does attend 6 of these briefings, which to some extent is why the briefings then will also have to overlap a little bit, and we'll have to cover off some things a couple of times, some of the actual key bits. But someone did ask me the other day, okay, what happens if I don't make 6? And it did make me think, well, what I need to do is to ensure that the pain of not doing 6 is greater than doing it, really, I suppose. I'm not into punishment or anything like that, but I'm trying to think of a suitable way of doing it. And I suspect that by the time we get to the end of March, if we have people who haven't been able to attend 6 of the briefings during the course of the year, when I've been doing them at random days and times throughout all the months, if you can't make 6, then you'll have to come and sit in an office environment, and we'll play them back to you, because of course they're all being taped. They're all available on SharePoint if you want to go back to them. But we'll sit you down and make you listen to them, which is a fate worse than death, I suspect. But if it encourages people to try and make the effort and get to these, then perhaps that's what we'll do. I'm also open to any suggestions about a better time, if you'd rather have them on a lunchtime. The idea originally was that we're going to do these, but obviously that there were going to be a mix of this type of presentation as well as probably more face-to-face ones, and we'd be probably doing those in the view. And my idea was to do it over a lunchtime when people will be available, and you could just drop in, listen to them for half an hour or so, and go away. Hopefully we'll get those going by the end of, well, probably way before the end of the year, but we will be able to get that going. So it's not just a case of logging onto these type of events. Give you at least have a different way of doing it. Okay, we're a couple of minutes past 11, so we'll make a start. Yeah, I won't say I'm gonna fly through this, but I think it's a shorter briefing than previously anyway. And the last couple came out at about 45 and 42 minutes, so I suspect this will be about half an hour or so. It's a slightly shorter briefing, but no less informative for that, I have to say. So let's get started. Right, on the welcome bit here, I was pretty much going to say what I've just said, which is that these are a series of 12 briefings in total, one a month, although this is the second one this month because we didn't do one in April. And to have it classed as your annual mandatory training, you should attend 6, although I'd like to encourage people to attend as many as they can, because the whole point of them is that they're going to be hopefully informative and interesting. If people would really rather sit at a computer and work through some dumb animation and tick a few boxes, then, you know, I was going to say you can do that, but you know what, you actually can't. I'm not giving you the option to do that because I think it's rubbish. You sit and listen to this, or as I was saying earlier on, if you can't fit in 6 during the course of the year, we'll find some alternative way of strapping you to a chair and playing them back to you near the end of March to make sure everyone gets compliance. I guess you get the idea. If anyone has any real objections to this, just let me know. Okay, what we're going to cover off today, Caldicott. For those of you who may not have been in the NHS or worked in NHS for a long time, and certainly for the people who just joined N3i, Caldicott may be an unusual little term that you find people still use occasionally. So I'm going to go a little bit of background of it, what it means, what it is, and it is still a very relevant term across the healthcare and social care sector now as well. So we'll talk about what it is and we'll go through the principles, which is the main bits of it. I'm going to talk a bit about passwords, give you some advice on how you can generate good passwords and the do's and don'ts around those. And that's pretty much it. Latest news, I've got the latest news on the NHS app, which clearly won't be very much. But I've got a couple of little things thrown in there as well that relate to the way that they're changing the lockdown. And are you really going to give all your data to Wetherspoons every time you go in to have a pint? We'll have a look at that when we get there. So Caldicott then, named after a lady called, she's now Dame Fiona Caldicott, who did a review of the way the NHS was using data back in the late 90s. This is, of course, at a time when the NHS and certainly across primary care, GP practices were just starting to get computer systems and all data was going online. And there were some concerns about the way the NHS was using data. And it came in 97, around the same time as the Data Protection Act came in 98. So slightly complementary, but the Caldicott report that Dame Fiona did into the use of of data across the NHS, she came up with these principles and recommendations and so on. It's not the law, so, and it only applies to the healthcare sector, although it's subsequently been extended across social care as well. So it relates to health and social care. They're not legally binding, that's what the Data Protection Act does, but the Caldicott principles are essentially a set of guidelines, principles that sit on top of the law, if you like, and talk about the additional measures that we may need to use across health and social care. So whilst we can have things being legal, what we still say is across, if we're dealing with people's very personal medical data, we can actually do even better than just legal. We can have even tighter controls, and that's what the Caldicott principles are. So there are 6 principles that came out in the original report. The revised 2013 bit added on a 7th principle, which I'll talk about specifically. But let's have a quick run through then the first 6 Caldicott principles. The first one says you need to justify the purpose. So going back to what I said about it being legal, yes, you may have the legal right to do something with someone's personal data, but can you justify why you're doing it? And so every use of people's personal data, either also within organizations as well. So when we think we have these very large organizations, you think of a local council has many departments, housing, transport, social care. So it includes the movement of data within organizations, departments, as well as external to other organizations. It should all be defined, scrutinized and documented. Okay. Something that we call an information governance data flow mapping, which is a fantastic sport if you ever get involved in it. But essentially that's what it is. And we talk about having these reviews regularly looked at least on a monthly basis or so by an appropriate guardian. And the Caldecott report recommended that all healthcare organisations should appoint someone who became known as the Caldecott Guardian. Within N3i, we don't have that because we're slightly different. We're providing a service to our customers. So our customers do all of this. All our GP practices will have a Caldecott Guardian, all the major hospitals and healthcare providers in the area, but we don't actually provide healthcare. So, for example, CHCP clearly do have a Caldecott Guardian because of their role. We're more of a support role, but we do have access specifically to the CHCP Guardian if we needed to do that, to look at stuff. Principle 2 says, don't use personal data unless it's absolutely necessary. So again, Data Protection Act will say this is the law, you can do this, but on top of that we say, well, yes, we can do that, but is it absolutely necessary to do that? So we shouldn't be using personal data unless it's necessary for the actual purpose that's been designed, that the flow and data has been described. And at each stage you should consider whether you can take patients' details out. Certainly the identifiable details. So do we need identifiable details to know how many people have got a certain disease in a certain area, that type of stuff. Where it is necessary to use people's personal data, we should always use the minimum amount of data. We should look at the inclusion of each individual item. So we're not using this sort of concept of just, give them everything just in case so we don't miss anything out. We need to be identifying all the bits of data that we're putting in there and saying, is it all really necessary? Principle 4, access should be on a strict need-to-know basis. So only people who need to have access to personal data should have access to it, and they should only see the items they need to see. And this may introduce access controls. We talk about within our smart card system, within the clinical systems that the GPs have, that the cards manage access to. We used to have something called role-based access control. We now have position-based access control, which kind of does that within the system. So clearly within a system at a GP practice, both the GP and the receptionist will have at times need to access a patient's record. However, they will need to see different bits of it. The GP will need to see pretty much all the record, whilst the receptionist may only need to see certain elements of it to do the task that they're involved in doing. So that's how our systems can actually implement this need-to-know basis. But the principle is there across all uses of personal data. Everyone with access to confidential data should be aware of their responsibilities. Here we are, guys, this is what we're actually doing. Action should be taken. This is you guys logging in and listening to this to ensure that people handling data are made aware of responsibilities and obligations. So not just specifically this session clearly, but that's the aim of the whole information governance training package, really, to make you aware of the law, Data Protection Act, around how people's data can be used, and then things like the principles here, the controls that we put in place, like passwords, which we'll mention later on. So how we do all of this around the responsibilities and the obligations that we have to look after the data that we're entrusted with. And we have to comply with the law. That's fairly straightforward. Like I said, these principles almost sit on top of the law, but clearly they have to be underpinned by the legal basis for processing, which I mentioned when we talked about Data Protection Act and GDPR in the last couple of sessions. There has to be a legal basis for processing someone's personal data. And again, it talks about here about people checking that, people being responsible for ensuring that we comply with it. And to a large extent, that's the Data Protection Officer, which is my function within the organisation, and also for many of the GP practices as well. So there are 6 principles that Dame Fiona came up with in her first Caldecott report, put them out to the NHS and said, guys, you need to be following these principles. First of all, of course, actually kind of contrary, the last one is the basic one anyway. You comply with the law first of all, and then you add these Caldecott principles on top for when we're looking at health and social care data. And that worked well, and I think people got used to this concept and put it into place. However, there were a number of cases that came up that were quite troubling over the years. And in 2013, Dame Fiona was asked by the government to review how information was being done across the NHS. And she came up with this report around to share or not to share, informally known as the Caldecott 2 review. And one of the reasons, or the primary driver behind the second review, were some very disturbing cases, such as the Victoria Columbier case, Baby Peter, some of these ones that were in the press you may have heard of, where there was a perception that data wasn't being used and wasn't being shared across organizations. And actually, there was almost a perception that information governance, the Data Protection Act, the Caldecott principles, all of these things coming into play, as they had done probably since the late 90s when Data Protection Act came in, Caldecott principles came out, had made people too risk averse, I think is probably the best way of putting it, and people weren't sharing data that they needed to share. And I think you could probably say, the pendulum had swung too far in favor of the restrictive views. People were constantly being given this message about not sharing data, looking after it, Data Protection Act, Caldecott, which were all quite not negative, but were fairly, that sort of enforcement concept was very much in place, and people had gone to being very risk averse. People would not share data because they felt that was the better thing to do. They couldn't get in trouble if they didn't share it. And I think that was a commonly held belief, that the best thing to do often to avoid getting into problems with sharing data and to avoid breaching the Data Protection Act or the Caldecott principles, all this sort of stuff, was to not share the data. And clearly what that brings in is the impact of not sharing data in many cases had a direct impact upon the healthcare in an adverse way. People didn't get the care that they needed, and situations developed where people didn't know what was going on across organizations. So Dame Fiona's second report then came out with a new principle, and it was to say that the duty to share information can be as important as the duty to protect it, and that people need to have confidence to share information in the best interests of patients. I think the best thing to take from the Caldecott report that I remember when I read it, it really struck me, was that we had this concept, and you talk to people, it became almost like there's an analogy with the health and safety thing where people don't allow you to do this, you can't do this, you can't do this. And actually you then, I know health and safety famously come up with the Mythbusters where they say, actually, we didn't say that, it doesn't mean this. And there was a similar concept in data protection, that people, when you asked them, said, oh no, I'm sure we've been told we can't share with this, and I'm sure the Data Protection Act won't let us to do that. And actually it didn't. And there was, Dame Fiona came up with, in her review, with a statement that said she wasn't able to find a single documented case where anyone had been taken to task, whether that be through the law or through an internal disciplinary process, anyone had been taken to task whatsoever for sharing data more than they should have done. It simply didn't happen. People would sometimes shout, and occasionally patients would make a fuss about it, but no one was ever found to have shared data inappropriately, so long as they'd made a thoughtful decision. Now, occasionally those thoughtful decisions may have been incorrect, but as long as they'd gone through the process of saying, can we do this, can we do this, can we do this, what she was absolutely determined to stop is this concept of, no, you can't do that. Data Protection Act says you can't do that. Okay, so that's what the principle 7 that came in was, to ensure that people need to be supported, need to know that they can share data, and that we need to move that pendulum back to the sort of the middle ground, if you like, where data is shared appropriately where it's necessary. Okay, right, hopefully that's fairly straightforward. Dame Fiona has gone on to become now someone called the National Data Guardian, which is an interesting post. It's now a statutory post, happened over the last couple of years. What that means is that the principles aren't the law still, but they're given added weight by having the statutory role that's approved by Parliament and all the other things that come along with that. When Dame Fiona says something, dear NHS, you're not doing this very well, it's not a question of what do you do now, is how high do we need us to jump. She really does have some power and some weight behind the things that she says, and she's done a number of reports subsequent to this, which we'll mention at a later stage. She's now moved on to look at data security and some of the things that we've been doing there. So a very important role and function, and indeed a very important person who will be around for a while, I suspect. And as I've already mentioned, going back to the first report, was a recommendation that every organisation should have a Caldecott Guardian. And again, for those of you who haven't been involved in the NHS, it is a term that you're liable to come across. It does sometimes just get used on its own. Has someone done an appropriate Caldecott check on that, or is this Caldecott correct? Does it follow the Caldecott principles and so on? So it is useful even for us who are working in the way we do work to have an awareness of what the terminology means. And of course, any questions at all, as I always say on this, more than happy if you want to come back to me. N3i, as I said, don't have their own Caldecott Guardian, but we certainly have access to the concept and we know what it's all about. And if we needed to go to someone, we could do that. Right, passwords. I'm sure there's a famous quote, which I actually couldn't find this morning from, I think it was from Bill Gates or Steve Jobs or some well-known person like that, saying passwords are the worst form of security ever and they wish they'd never invented them. I think many of us probably wish the same. However, they are the access control, if you like, that we have to get onto our IT systems, and they're how we enforce controls around our systems. And so they are absolutely key to the way that we all work. So I'm going to go through a few principles, give you a couple of ideas about making good passwords. And I'm happy to have a discussion. I don't get too authoritarian about this. Hopefully, I never get authoritarian about anything, but hopefully I'll try to be pragmatic about some of the stuff we're going to talk about here. Right. Obviously, a lot of you out there are system admin people, and you have these SA accounts and you have access to passwords which are set and so on. This isn't about that. I'm going to leave this in the very capable hands of Chris Wallace to define and to determine how he manages system admin passwords and passwords that need to be shared amongst technical people to ensure our systems keep up and working. So this isn't about, we're talking about standard user accounts here and standard users passwords. I'm aware that there are different rules and there are different procedures around how you admin or how you look after your system admin accounts. And as I say, I'll let Chris look after that side of things. So basic passwords rules, and we all know we don't write them down. Come on, guys, this is basic stuff. We put huge amounts of resources into getting our computers secured and encrypted and all that other good stuff. If you write your password down on a post-it which you stick under the lid of the computer, all of that's a waste of time. We may as well have not bothered. And we're clever in that. We don't need to be doing this sort of stuff. We've all seen it. I recall a picture of a consultant's computer from a hospital with post-it notes pinned all around the screen with all these different passwords. There is an element of this that perhaps he's got too many passwords, and that makes life difficult for us. The more passwords we have, the more difficult life becomes, and therefore leads us to write things down and stuff. That can be it's one of life's modern conundrums, isn't it? That the rules that we put around passwords become more and more difficult the more passwords we have and the more we use them. But writing them down should really be a no-no. Putting my pragmatic hat on here, I have seen people who do this. My mum actually does it as well. She has her address book, that's the little book that always sits, she keeps in her purse all the time. And she has a number of passwords that she just says, I have to write them down. So I think on one of the pages, Auntie Edith's address actually isn't, or the postcode to it clearly isn't the postcode, it's actually the password, and Uncle John's phone number actually is another password. So there are ways of writing things down. If you really feel that there's a password that's been created that you're going to really struggle, then again, don't put I remember seeing a district nurse once came up and we're doing a session. Actually, it was this type of session, and she left a filofax. She went out and I managed to catch her. And the first page of a filofax was passwords. It was actually called passwords, and then actually listed system one login password is, and actually wrote it out in full. So we can be cleverer than this, can't we, guys? And that's actually having an understanding of what they protect. So don't share them. Yeah, but hopefully this is fairly fundamental. There's a good point, I think, for our service desk guys to note that if we're, if I'm telling everybody out there, don't share your password, no one should ever ask for it, no one should ever need to use it, then, when we're supporting customers, we shouldn't have to be asking them to give us their passwords, because we just shouldn't do it. You wouldn't give it to anyone that rings you up, hopefully. You just don't share them. In terms of logging onto systems, not just sharing your passwords, but sharing essentially your credentials, again, shouldn't be something we do, because legally, when you log onto a computer system, and if you remember back when you've logged onto your work system, there's that flash screen that comes up at the beginning before your login screen. Anything you do on a computer system is legally attributable to you under your, if it's logged on under your credentials. So if you log on and you know, a clinical system and put in some clinical input, and you've used Nurse Smith's smart card because you couldn't find your own that morning, that data is legally attributable to Nurse Smith. The computer doesn't know that it wasn't her. You know, if you log on, put in your username and password, the computer just thinks username password, that's whoever that is. It's Barry Jackson. That's my username and password. It doesn't know that someone else is using it at that time. Therefore, I am legally responsible for everything that happens. And clearly, I'm legally responsible for any patient records that I were to access or any inappropriate actions that I would take on the system. So again, that's a fairly strong thing as to why we shouldn't share passwords. Change often and don't reuse them. Okay, I'm going to tell you all into a secret here, as long as you don't tell anyone else. I don't change my computer passwords very often, and there is a paper actually from from GCHQ, who tend to be our national point of reference for all of this sort of stuff, that actually changing passwords isn't all that necessary, and that you don't need to do it, particularly because of the points I've just made, that if we make people change their passwords all the time, it's going to be pretty difficult for most users will struggle with that. If you think of the number of passwords you've got, the only ones that tend to change regularly are our work ones, our networks, and our NHS mail passwords. And that causes problems, doesn't it? We've got to make up a whole new password. How do you manage to do that? You know, I've been working here for 20 years now. Every 3 months I've had to change my password. You know, that becomes difficult, and that actually makes life difficult for us to then say to people, but don't write your passwords down, and don't make easy passwords and stuff like that. So there is a conundrum around that, and I can be quite easily swayed to the fact that routinely making people change passwords isn't necessarily the best thing to do, as long as we've got them into making good passwords in the first place and we're confident those passwords haven't been compromised. Okay, don't make them too easy. You know, password changing the P to a 5 or something like that, you know, it's not big or clever. It might be able to fool the system into allowing you to use it, although most systems now will try and pick up easy passwords. You know, it's your data from a personal perspective. That's what you're trying to secure. You know, it's your Facebook account. If you're going to put a stupid password on that, then that's your lookout. But in the work, it's my patient record that you're protecting. You know, this is sensitive stuff here, guys. Don't go down the easy route of doing the stupid passwords. Wherever possible, use two-factor authentication. You know, this isn't just at work. Clearly, this is in your personal life as well. Most systems now will allow you to do this. They'll do very clever things like, you know, they'll recognize the system that you logged into. What did I do? Oh yeah, I was going to say, I had a bit of a faff with my Netflix the other day. So I changed the password on it, and within half an hour I had my son and daughter on the phone to me screaming, "You've changed the password! What's going on? I can't get on the Netflix." So actually that can be used to as well. And of course, I did tell them what the password was, which is very bad, of course, but it does. I then get messages saying that this system is authenticated. So, you know, and I got the messages saying that they've logged on to Netflix on their smart TVs and stuff like that. So systems are getting very clever, even in personal, you know, out in the big wide world there. We are improving, we are doing things that make security better. We just need to play our own part in all of that, don't we? And try and do our bit correctly, which will hopefully feed into systems. Of course, the two-factor authentication we have in our systems, or the NHS smart card, just the terminology there, I'm aware I'm using terminology. Two-factor authentication. So normal username and password is one factor. It's something you know. You know what your username and logon is. There are two elements there, but you know them both. And if you have that knowledge, you can log in. I wouldn't know what your username and password is, therefore I couldn't. I could probably guess what your username is, but if I can't get your password, then I can't log in. Two-factor authentication is something you know and something you have. So I have a smart card to log in. If I don't physically have that card with me, then I can't log in, no matter how much I know about it. I could read the number off it and all that sort of other good stuff. I know what the PIN is and stuff. If I don't physically have it with me, then I can't log in. That's the two-factor bit, something you know and something you have. And increasingly, that thing that you have may well be when you try to log in, it may be on your smartphone, sending you a PIN number, and that becomes the thing that you didn't know in advance, but that you're given and that you then have to log in. So you need to have the phone itself as part of the two-factor authentication to be able to log into a system. And that's becoming increasingly common across not just personal use, but across our NHS. Smart cards are used in almost all situations now, accessing clinical systems and many other systems as well, the ESR, our staff records, and so on. Okay, so examples of good passwords. How do you do? There's making up the phrase example. So here's a phrase. I live in a 2-bedroom house with 3 cats. Okay, so we use this as our baseline phrase that we've developed. It's quite good. It's got a couple of numbers in there, which is going to help us. And we take the first letter and make up a password like that. Now, this is a system that I've used since going back to my military days when I used to have to make up passwords. I developed a phrase that I know, that I'm comfortable with, that I know no one else has ever guessed, and I use it. And talk about the reuse of passwords. I'll be honest with you guys, I reuse that phrase in many, many different ways. I actually started using the phrase when I started work here in the NHS, back when I did have 3 cats. I logged in this morning using pretty much the same phrase, except now I have 63 cats. I think I logged in with this morning, because I don't have to have 63 cats. It doesn't have to be an actual thing. It can be anything you like. Those old gags are the best ones, aren't they? I've been using that gag since 2001 when I first did this, as Paul Freer, who's sat there now groaning away to himself, will attest to. But yeah, the old ones are the best. But that is a way of making up a phrase that I'm making up a password from a phrase. Another one which I've seen more recently, making up random words. Just put 3 words together, and as long as you can remember what they are, that's a relatively good password. I'd probably rather it had letters, and you can add in things like uppercase and lowercase and your special characters as well. But that's a couple of fairly straightforward examples of making up what will be pretty good passwords. Okay, what have I got next? The latest news. I've got a couple of stories here, actually, that we covered off last time, but I just want to mention them again to ensure that you've all got the concepts. So this NHS Mail thing, Chris Hall has written a really good guide to this, and the solution to it is actually now on the software thing that you can roll out the installation yourselves. So it's a process that allows an NHS Mail account to send to a non-secure address. So within our NHS Mail system, hopefully you know this, it's classed as a secure system. It's formally accredited for sending people's personal data from one NHS Mail account to another NHS Mail account. There are then a number of other national systems which directly link into it. So the police have a system called PNN. Local government have their own secure systems, and again, they have been specifically accredited for sending personal data, and you can also now send between NHS Mail and, say, the police system, and that data will be secure, and that's authenticated. What isn't secure are things such as Gmail, Hotmail, various other non-work addresses. So how do we send people's personal data to those types of addresses? And NHS Mail has a process that allows us to do that. It goes through a third party, and the other people who are receiving have to create a little account and so on, but it's fairly straightforward. I've done it myself. It doesn't take more than a couple of minutes. And if you're doing it to people routinely, so GP practices who routinely send information perhaps to a local solicitors or to an organisation that doesn't use NHS Mail, you should put this in place at the same time. It's really straightforward, and once you get that flow of data going back and forward, it works fine. The one thing that we'd had until recently was this limit on the file size. So there was a fairly tight limit on file sizes that you could use. The NHS have just put in a new system that removes that file size limit, and it takes it up to 5 gigabytes, which is, I think, for most patient records and so on. I think practices are finding that that's quite acceptable, and that works pretty well. So they can send things like records back to patients themselves. So if they get a subject access request, remember we covered that last time, people can ask for their own data. The practice can download that data off, say, System 1 into a file, and they can now email that file to the non-secure address, but in a secure way, so the recipient gets it in a secure manner. Of course, they can then post on Facebook if they like, but that's entirely up to them. The post-hospital GP. Okay, there's a this was really more about reminding me that a lot of the stuff I've done, the information governance briefings are on a website which you can go to. I think I put that around last time. I'll circulate again. I'll stick it on the Teams chat so you can see that again if you want to do it. The main point I think for us that comes out of the Portugal hospital case is to ensure that if we are logging on to support someone at a practice in a support role, that we log on in a role that says that's what we're doing. So we shouldn't be logging on as, say, a role that says I'm the practice manager for that day or whatever. We log on in a role that describes the function that we're carrying out. There are lots of reasons why we may need to log on to a clinical system or onto someone else's clinical record system, but we need to ensure that we're given the right permissions and that those permissions are described correctly. That's the main thing to take out of there. But that's all in a briefing document that's on our information governance webpage. Finally, okay, I promised you something about the NHS app. Well, not quite. You'll have seen I heard no doubt about the lockdown being eased and certain things are going to be open, pubs and restaurants. Okay, everyone cheering in the background there, that news. One of the things that I don't know if you've missed or that you did see is in the guidance to pubs and restaurants was this bit, and this is directly from the government guidance to pubs and restaurants. It says that all these pubs and restaurants have to keep a temporary record of customers and visitors for 21 days. So that's going to be things such as their name, address, and email account, who they're with, all that other sort of information. Very, very interesting information. I predict this will be the next big data breach, so a big data problem that's going to come along. Clearly, yes, it will insist the test and trace servers that the NHS have put in place, but I'm really not sure that I want Tim Martin or Witherspoons to have all the details of when I go into his pub, although to be honest that'll be fairly infrequently. But any local pub, and I suspect actually the big chain pubs like Witherspoons and so on will be able to put in some sort of place, some sort of system, whether you just quickly have to tap your phone on something for them to interrogate and get your data, or how it works. It's probably going to the smaller organisations, the smaller independent pubs and restaurants that'll end up putting in their own systems to do this, and we'll totally get it wrong. I've seen a business opportunity here, I suspect. Anyway, I just thought I'm sure you'd all seen that. I just thought I'd add that in. Right, I promised you ice creams. There you go. It's ridiculously hot, isn't it, today, guys? Okay, stay as cool as you can. Any questions about any of this, please drop me a line directly if you wish, or put something through to the service desk, Market Information Governance, and I will aim to get back to you. Thank you all very much for listening on this hot day. I will let you get off and have lunch and a cooling drink, non-alcoholic drink, I'm sure. Thanks, guys. Take care. Bye.
Hi, Barry. You hear me?
Hi, yeah, I can.
Yeah, I was just going to say, obviously, with the delay in it, people could type any questions in the Q&A section while it's still live.
Okay,
you said do it direct to you or via the service desk, but they'll obviously still hear this if they're on, so.
Okay, yeah, of course, yeah, people can
hover over the, your little question mark bubble. They can obviously type something in there if they wish to.
Have we had any questions? Because you can see them, I can't. Have we had any queries come through? No.
No.
Okay, that's fine. And can we see how many people are still live?
Yeah, it's going down rapidly, as you would.
I suspect with that,
so
yeah, it's that delay, isn't it? So people will now be starting to leave. Okay. Do you want to give 5 minutes? I'll log off now anyway, Melanie, and close it down. Give me a call in about 5 minutes.
Yeah, no worries. Okay.
Okay, cheers.
All right, bye.